Have you ever wondered what happens when the most powerful women in history collide? What happens when ambition burns brighter than sisterhood, or when the weight of a crown is too heavy for two heads? For centuries, queens, empresses, and regents have wielded immense power, shaping nations and rewriting destiny. But sometimes two queens found themselves on a collision course, locked in a brutal struggle for ultimate control. These were not mere squabbles, these were epic clashes that shook thrones to their foundations. Number 10. Empress Dowager Cixi and Empress Dowager Ci'an. The air in the Forbidden City in the mid-19th century was always heavy with silk and secrets. But after the death of the Jianfeng Emperor in 1861, a new tension settled. Two women, both widows of the deceased emperor, were suddenly thrust into power as co-regents for the child emperor Cixi. On one side stood Empress Dowager Ci'an, the primary empress, a woman known for her kindness, gentle nature, and adherence to tradition. On the other was Empress Dowager Cixi, a former concubine, the birth mother of the young emperor, a woman of formidable intellect, ruthless ambition, and sharp political instincts. Their co-regency was an arrangement of necessity designed to prevent a council of regents from seizing too much power. But from the very beginning, the seeds of an epic struggle were sown. Ci'an held the senior position, her authority stemming from her status as the empress. Cixi, however, possessed the one thing Ci'an did not: the living emperor, her own son. While Ci'an handled much of the day-to-day administrative duties and upheld the ceremonial aspects of the throne, Cixi quickly demonstrated an uncanny knack for understanding the intricacies of court politics. She cultivated relationships with key officials, listened intently to discussions, and made her opinions known with a subtle but firm hand. Ci'an, perhaps more comfortable with the traditional roles of an Empress Dowager, sometimes deferred to Cixi's bolder judgments, especially on matters of state policy. This initial deference, slowly but steadily, allowed Cixi to build a formidable network of allies and to establish herself as the true driving force behind the regency. The Enyu coup of 1861, which saw the two Empresses Dowager eliminate the 8 powerful regents initially appointed by the Yanfeng Emperor, was a testament to their combined power. But it also highlighted Cixi's strategic brilliance. While Ci'an's consent was crucial, it was Cixi who orchestrated the plot, secured the backing of Prince Gong, and ensured a swift, decisive takeover. This joint victory solidified their positions, but also subtly shifted the balance of power in Cixi's favor. She had proven herself the more decisive and daring political operator. As the years passed, the differences in their approaches became more pronounced. Ci'an remained the quiet, conservative force, often seen as a benevolent figurehead. Cixi, meanwhile, was the innovator pushing for reforms, dealing directly with foreign powers, and making critical decisions on military and financial matters. She held daily audiences, reviewed memorials, and issued edicts, often overshadowing Ci'an in the practical exercise of power. While Ci'an maintained respect and held the official seniority, it was Cixi's will that increasingly shaped the direction of the empire. Officials understood that while both empresses needed to approve decisions, Cixi's approval was the one that truly mattered for effective implementation. Whispers of their rivalry were subtle, rarely overt. Courtiers watched closely for any sign of a rift, any disagreement that might escalate. There were instances where their differing opinions became apparent, particularly regarding the handling of court eunuchs or the education of the young emperor. Cixi, ever the pragmatist, was known for her willingness to overlook minor transgressions if they served a greater purpose, while Ci'an, adhering strictly to moral principles, sometimes clashed with Cixi's more Machiavellian tendencies. The eventual death of Ci'an in 1881 remains a topic of historical debate, though official reports cited a sudden illness. Her passing left Cixi, as the sole Empress Dowager and regent, unshackled by the need for consensus or the presence of a senior equal. While the exact circumstances of Ci'an's death are shrouded in mystery, Its timing certainly cemented Cixi's absolute control over the Aegean dynasty for decades to come, enabling her to shape the empire's fate without direct challenge from a co-ruler. The struggle, often subtle and psychological, had reached its ultimate conclusion, leaving one woman in undisputed command. Number 9. Mary I and Elizabeth I. The year is 1553. England is on the brink, reeling from religious upheaval and a tumultuous succession. Mary Tudor, devoutly Catholic daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, finally ascends the throne after a dramatic struggle. But her reign was shadowed from its very start by her half-sister, Elizabeth Tudor, the Protestant daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Though Elizabeth was the designated heir according to Henry VIII's will, her legitimacy was questioned by many Catholics, and her very existence represented a threat to Mary's vision of a Catholic England. Power struggle between these two queens, one ruling and one waiting, was a constant simmering battle for the soul of a nation. Mary saw Elizabeth as a dangerous symbol of Protestantism and a rallying point for those who opposed her religious reforms. Elizabeth, though outwardly submissive and cautious, was undeniably nautic and popular, especially among the Protestant faction. Mary's desire to secure the Catholic succession led her to marry Philip II of Spain, a decision deeply unpopular in England, further increasing Protestant hopes for Elizabeth's eventual ascension. This foreign marriage only heightened the tension between the half-sisters. The first major confrontation came with Wyatt's rebellion in 1554. This Protestant uprising, fueled by anti-Spanish sentiment, aimed to depose Mary and place Elizabeth on the throne. Though Elizabeth publicly denied any involvement, she was undeniably implicated. Mary, suspecting Elizabeth's complicity, had her imprisoned in the Tower of London. For weeks, Elizabeth's life hung by a thread. Mary's council urged her to execute Elizabeth, fearing she would always be a focal point for rebellion. Yet Mary, perhaps swayed by family ties or lacking definitive proof, eventually released Elizabeth, placing her under house arrest. This act of leniency was a strategic gamble, and one that demonstrated Mary's deep internal conflict regarding her sister. She wanted a Catholic heir, and Elizabeth stood in the way, that Mary could not bring herself to order her execution. The religious differences were at the heart of their struggle. Mary launched a fierce campaign to restore Catholicism, persecuting Protestants, earning her the moniker Bloody Mary. Elizabeth, meanwhile, had to navigate a perilous path, outwardly conforming to Catholic rites, while maintaining her Protestant faith in private. Her popularity, her refusal to marry a Catholic prince, her very presence in England were seen by Mary as a direct challenge to her authority and the stability of her reign. Mary continually pressed Elizabeth to marry a Catholic suitor, hoping to remove her from the English political scene or ensure a Catholic line. But Elizabeth artfully dodged these attempts, fully aware that her unmarried status preserved her as a potential successor. Mary's desperate attempts to produce a Catholic heir proved futile. Her phantom pregnancies and declining health only intensified the national focus on Elizabeth as the inevitable successor. The lack of an heir from Mary meant that, despite her best efforts to secure a Catholic future for England, the crown would ultimately pass to her Protestant half-sister. As Mary's health deteriorated, her paranoia about Elizabeth grew, though the official position of Elizabeth as heir was never formally revoked. On her deathbed in 1558, Mary was forced to acknowledge the reality. Elizabeth would be queen. The power struggle between them, one a ruling monarch trying to impose her will, the other a patient, shrewd survivor waiting for her moment, ended not with a dramatic clash of arms, but with the quiet surrender of Mary to fate. Elizabeth's ascension marked a definitive end to Mary's Catholic restoration and ushered in a new era for England, a testament to Elizabeth's cunning survival and Mary's tragic inability to secure her legacy against the very force she feared most. Number 8. Mary, Queen of Scots and Elizabeth I. Barely had Elizabeth I secured her throne in England in 1558 when a formidable new rival emerged from across the border, Mary, Queen of Scots. Cousins by blood, both descended from Henry VII. Their lives became irrevocably intertwined in an epic power struggle that spanned decades and defined the politics of 16th century Britain. Mary, a devout Catholic, had a strong claim to the English throne through her grandmother Margaret Tudor, Henry VII's daughter. Many Catholics in England considered Elizabeth illegitimate due to her father, Henry VIII's divorce from Catherine of Aragon, and his marriage to Anne Boleyn. This made Mary a potent symbol for English Catholics and an alternative monarch for those disaffected with Elizabeth's Protestant rule. The struggle began almost immediately. Mary, who had been raised in France and married to the French Dauphin, Francis II refused to formally renounce her claim to the English throne, even styling herself Queen of England on occasion. This was an intolerable affront to Elizabeth, who saw it as a direct challenge to her legitimacy and sovereignty. When Francis II died, Mary returned to Scotland in 1561, a young widow stepping into a turbulent Protestant kingdom dominated by powerful nobles. Her presence in Scotland immediately escalated the tension. With England, Elizabeth's strategy was one of careful containment. She sent numerous ambassadors to Scotland, urging Mary to sign the Treaty of Edinburgh, which would formally recognize Elizabeth's claim to the English throne. Mary consistently refused, understanding that her claim was her greatest bargaining chip and leverage against her powerful cousin. Their correspondence was filled with polite but firm declarations of their positions, a diplomatic dance masking a deeper struggle for supremacy. The personal lives of both queens became entangled with their political rivalry. Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, shrewdly used her unmarried status to maintain control over potential suitors and alliances, while Mary, desperate for heirs and alliances, married twice more after Francis II. Her marriage to Lord Darnley, a Catholic English noble with his own claim to the English throne, was a particularly threatening development for Elizabeth, as it strengthened the possibility of a powerful Catholic Anglo-Scottish dynasty. Mary's reign in Scotland, however, was marred by scandal, misjudgment, and internal strife. Her involvement in the murder of her secretary David Rizzio and then her husband Darnley, followed by her controversial marriage to the Earl of Bothwell, alienated many Scottish nobles and her own people. In 1567, she was forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI, and eventually fled to England seeking refuge with Elizabeth. Mary's arrival in England was a diplomatic nightmare for Elizabeth. Mary was a queen, Elizabeth's cousin, and technically her guest, but also a dangerous Catholic claimant. Elizabeth immediately placed Mary under house arrest. For the next 19 years, Mary became a constant source of fear and conspiracy. English Catholics saw her as a potential liberator, and numerous plots emerged aimed at assassinating Elizabeth and placing Mary on the throne. The Babington Plot of 1586, which directly implicated Mary in a scheme to assassinate Elizabeth, provided the necessary evidence for Elizabeth's council to demand Mary's trial and execution. Despite her initial reluctance to execute a fellow anointed monarch, Elizabeth eventually signed Mary's death warrant. Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed in February 1587. This final brutal act brought the epic power struggle to its definitive end. Elizabeth had eliminated her most dangerous rival, securing her throne and the Protestant succession. Yet the legacy of their struggle lived on, profoundly shaping Anglo-Scottish relations and setting the stage for the eventual union of the crowns under Mary's son James VI of Scotland, who would become James I of England. Their rivalry remains one of history's most captivating tales of two queens battling for one crown. Number 7. Cleopatra VII and Arsinoe IV. The stage for this intense sibling power struggle was set in the gilded, intrigue-laden court of Ptolemaic Egypt. In the 1st century BCE, Cleopatra VII, the most famous queen of Egypt, was already on the throne, sharing nominal rule with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, as was the Ptolemaic custom. But the true power lay with Cleopatra, a brilliant, modic, and ruthlessly ambitious ruler. Her younger sister, Arsinoe IV, harbored her own ambitions, feeling overshadowed and perhaps seeing herself as a more legitimate heir to the dynasty. The arrival of Julius Caesar in Egypt in 48 BC, pursuing his rival Pompey, ignited the powder keg and turned a simmering sibling rivalry into a brutal war for the throne. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria, he found the city embroiled in a civil war between Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII, orchestrated by Ptolemy's regents. Cleopatra, having been exiled famously, had herself smuggled into the palace in a rug to meet Caesar and plead her case. She quickly captivated the Roman general, securing his support for her claim to the throne. This alliance profoundly angered the young Ptolemy XIII and his powerful advisors, leading to what is known as the Alexandrian War. It was during this conflict that Arsinoe IV truly emerged as a direct rival to Cleopatra. Escaping Caesar's palace, Arsinoe joined the forces of Ptolemy XIII. Her charisma and royal lineage quickly made her a rallying figure for the Egyptian nationalist faction, and those who opposed Cleopatra's reliance on Roman power. The Egyptian army, seeing Arsinoe as a more palatable alternative to Cleopatra, who was now openly allied with Caesar, proclaimed Arsinoe Queen of Egypt and plausibly making her a co-ruler with Ptolemy XIII, in opposition to Cleopatra. Arsinoe, though young, demonstrated a surprising military acumen and a fierce will to power. She led troops, advised commanders, and made crucial tactical decisions against Caesar's forces. Her presence invigorated the Egyptian resistance, and for a time it seemed she might succeed in overthrowing her elder sister and Caesar's influence. She was a powerful figure, able to command loyalty and inspire action against Rome's might. The struggle became a direct clash between two sisters, each vying for the sole control of the Ptolemaic legacy. The war was brutal and destructive, fought in the streets of Alexandria and along the Nile. Arsinoe's forces laid siege to Caesar's position in the royal palace, attempting to cut off his supplies and overwhelm his small Roman contingent. She was a formidable opponent, forcing Caesar to send urgent requests for reinforcements. Climax came in the Battle of the Nile, where Caesar's reinforced legions decisively defeated the Egyptian army. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile during the retreat, and Arsinoe is captured. Cleopatra, with Caesar's victory, solidified her rule. Arsinoe was paraded through the streets of Rome in Caesar's triumph, a visible symbol of his victory and her defeat. Instead of executing her immediately, Caesar, perhaps out of respect for her royal blood or to make a political statement, merely exiled her to the temple of Artemis at Ephesus. This exile, however, did not erase her as a potential threat. Years later, after Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra persuaded Mark Antony to have Arsinoe executed. She was murdered in 41 BCE at Ephesus, the last surviving sibling of Cleopatra, and a constant reminder of the brutal power struggle that had unfolded in Alexandria. Her execution eliminated the last direct rival to Cleopatra's absolute rule, ensuring her singular grip on the throne of Egypt until her own dramatic end. Number 6. Isabella I of Castile and Juana la Beltraya. The 15th century in Castile was a time of political instability, and into this turbulent scene stepped two women, each with a claim to the throne destined for an epic power struggle that would ignite a civil war. On one side stood Isabella, half-sister to King Henry IV of Castile, a strong-willed, intelligent, and ambitious. On the other was Juana, the king's daughter, whose legitimacy was fiercely debated. She was known as Juana la Beltranea because many suspected her true father was Beltrán de la Cueva, a royal favorite rather than the king. The struggle for the Castilian throne between Isabella and Juana was not just a family feud. It was a war of succession that would define Spain's future. King Henry IV had been unable to produce a male heir, and his daughter Juana was widely seen as illegitimate by a significant faction of the nobility. This opened the door for Isabella, who had been excluded from the line of succession by the king in favor of Juana, but who was seen by many as the rightful heir, due to her direct lineage from an earlier undisputed Castilian king. Isabella's secret marriage in 1469 to Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of Aragon, further complicated matters. This marriage was a strategic coup, creating a formidable union of two powerful Iberian kingdoms, but it infuriated King Henry, who saw it as an act of defiance and a direct threat to Juana's claim. When King Henry IV died in 1474, the power struggle erupted into open warfare. Isabella immediately proclaimed herself Queen of Castile and Segovia, despite the fact that King Henry's will had named Juana as his successor. Juana, supported by her powerful uncle, King Afonso V of Portugal, who also married her to strengthen her claim, also proclaimed herself queen. The War of the Castilian Succession had begun, pitting Isabella and Ferdinand against Juana and Afonso. The war was a brutal affair, lasting for 5 years. Both sides fought fiercely for control of cities, castles, and ultimately the hearts and minds of the Castilian people. Isabella proved to be a formidable leader. Actively involved in the war effort, she traveled extensively, rallying her troops, securing alliances, and personally overseeing logistics. She displayed remarkable courage and determination, often appearing on the battlefield to inspire her soldiers, an unusual role for a woman in that era. Her military leadership was pivotal to her success. Juana, despite her youth and the cloud of illegitimacy, was not without her supporters. She represented the established line of succession and had the backing of a powerful foreign monarch. However, her dependence on Afonso V's military might and her lack of direct leadership proved to be a disadvantage against Isabella's dynamic approach. The Castilian nobility was deeply divided, with powerful families aligning themselves with either Isabella or Juana, often shifting allegiances based on strategic advantage or personal gain. Key battles, such as the Battle of Toro in 1476, were fought with immense ferocity, though the outcome was indecisive. It allowed Isabella to consolidate her support within Castile. Isabella and Ferdinand's strategic prowess and effective governance of the territories they controlled contrasted sharply with the more reactive strategies of Juana's faction. Slowly but surely, Isabella's forces gained the upper hand. The war finally concluded with the Treaty of Alcacovas in 1479. Juana, defeated and her cause lost, was given a choice: marry Isabella's infant son John, or enter a convent. She chose the latter, dedicating her life to religious contemplation, thereby formally renouncing her claim to the throne. This act decisively ended the power struggle. Isabella I emerged victorious, solidifying her rule over Castile and paving the way for the unification of Spain with Aragon under her and Ferdinand's Catholic monarch's reign. The long, bloody struggle for the crown had ended forever, changing the course of Iberian history. Number 5. Fredegund and Brunhilde. The 6th century in Merovingian France was a time of brutal feuds, betrayals, and endless warfare, and at the heart of this chaos were two queens, whose rivalry was so intense it defined an era and ignited a generations-long conflict. On one side stood Fredegund, a former servant who rose to become the Queen of Neustria through ambition and cunning. On the other was Brunhilde, a Visigothic princess who became Queen of Austrasia, known for her intelligence, administrative skill, and fierce determination. Their struggle was not just for influence, it was a personal vendetta, fueled by murder, revenge, and a relentless pursuit of power for their respective kingdom. The feud began with a shocking act of violence Brunhilde was married to King Sigebert, the first of Austrasia. Her sister Galswinthe was married to Sigebert's brother, King Chilperic, the first of Neustria. Chilperic, however, had fallen deeply in love with Fredegund, his concubine. In 567 CE, Chilperic murdered Galswinthe allegedly at Fredegund's instigation and promptly married Fredegund. Brunhilde was enraged by her sister's murder and swore vengeance against Fredegund and Chilperic. This personal grievance quickly escalated into a full-blown dynastic war between Austrasia and Neustria. Fredegund, despite her humble origins, was a ruthless political operator. She was a master of intrigue, eliminating rivals and consolidating her power around her husband Chilperic. Her ambition was boundless, and she was willing to commit any crime to secure her position and that of her children. Brunhilde, though of royal birth, was equally tenacious. She rallied her husband Sigebert to war against Chilperic and Fredegund, demanding justice for Galswinthe's murder and asserting her family's honor. The conflict plunged Francia into decades of civil war. Battles raged across the landscape, and assassinations became common. In 575 CE, Sigebert, almost certainly at Fredegund's instigation. This act transformed Brunhilde from an avenging widow into a powerful queen mother and regent for her young son, Childebert II. Fredegund, meanwhile, continued her reign of terror, ordering the murders of other powerful nobles and even her own stepchildren, who posed a threat to her sons. When Chilperic I was himself assassinated in 584 CE, Fredegund was left a widow, but her power did not wane. She became regent for her infant son Clothar II and continued her relentless struggle against Brunhilde. Their rivalry was total, encompassing military campaigns, political maneuvering, and a deep abiding hatred that permeated their courts. Fredegund used her influence to stir up rebellions against Brunhilde in Austrasia, while Brunhilde plotted to overthrow Fredegund's regency and unite Francia under her own family. The struggle spanned several generations. Fredegund died in 597 CE, having successfully secured her son Clothar's position on the throne of Neustria. However, the feud with Brunhilde did not end with her death. Brunhilde continued to fight against Fredegund's son, Clothar II, for many more years, seeking to impose her authority over the entire Merovingian kingdom. She ruled effectively as regent for her grandsons in Austrasia and Burgundy, demonstrating remarkable political longevity and administrative skill. Ultimately, Brunhilde's reign ended in a horrific manner. In 613 CE, she was betrayed by her own nobles, captured by Clothar II, and subjected to a brutal execution, allegedly dragged to death behind a horse. The death of Brunhilde finally brought an end to the protracted bloody power struggle that had begun with Fredegund's crimes. Their epic rivalry, driven by personal vendetta and dynastic ambition, left an indelible mark on early French history, illustrating the fierce power and destructive capability of two queens, locked in a battle to the death. Number 4. Empress Wu Zetian and Empress Wang. The Tang dynasty in 7th century China was a period of great prosperity and cultural flourishing. But behind the opulent palace walls, a silent and deadly power struggle unfolded between two formidable women. Empress Wang, the primary consort of Emperor Gaozong, held the highest position among the imperial women. She was of noble birth, elegant, and traditionally educated. Her rival, Wu Zetian, entered the palace as a concubine of Gaozong's father, Emperor Taizong. After Taizong's death, she was sent to a convent, but was later recalled by Gaozong, who had become infatuated with her. Wu Zetian's return set the stage for an epic and ruthless battle for supremacy within the Forbidden City. Empress Wang and her chief ally, consort Zhao, initially view Wu Zetian as a new plaything for the emperor, perhaps even a potential ally against each other. They soon discovered the true nature of the woman they had brought back into the palace. Wu Zetian possessed an extraordinary intellect, sharp political instincts, and an unyielding will to power. She quickly gained the emperor's complete devotion, surpassing all other consorts in his affections. This direct challenge to Empress Wang's authority and status ignited a bitter rivalry. Wu Zetian began to systematically undermine Empress Wang. She was a master manipulator, fabricating stories and creating incidents that cast Empress Wang in a negative light. One of the most infamous accusations involved the death of Wu Zetian's own infant daughter. Wu allegedly strangled her baby, and then blamed Empress Wang, exploiting the emperor's grief and anger to turn him against his primary consort. Though the truth of this accusation is debated by historians, it was devastatingly effective in fueling Gaozong's distrust of Empress Wang. Beyond such shocking personal attacks, Wu Zetian also meticulously cultivated her network within the court. She befriended influential eunuchs, secured the loyalty of crucial officials, and even won over members of the imperial family. She presented herself as a dutiful and intelligent companion to the emperor, offering shrewd advice on matters of state, which Empress Wang, perhaps less interested in day-to-day governance, did not. This allowed Wu to gradually establish herself as an indispensable figure to Gaozong, eroding Empress Wang's traditional power base. Empress Wang and consort Zhao, realizing the dire threat Wu Zetian posed belatedly, attempted to fight back. They tried to regain the emperor's favor and expose Wu's machinations, but their efforts were largely unsuccessful. Gaozong was deeply infatuated with Wu Zetian, and her political acumen was superior. The imperial bureaucracy and even members of the royal clan began to sense the shift in power, and many began to align themselves with the rising star. Wu Zetian, the climax of their struggle, came in 655 CE. Despite strong opposition from many senior officials and the imperial family, Emperor Gaozong, deeply influenced by Wu Zetian and convinced of Empress Wang's supposed misdeeds, formally deposed Empress Wang and consort Zhao. Immediately after, he elevated Wu Zetian to the position of empress. This was an unprecedented move, shaking the foundations of the Tang court. The fate of Empress Wang and consort Zhao after their deposition was brutal. Wu Zetian, determined to eliminate any lingering threat, had them imprisoned and then ordered their execution. Their bodies were dismembered and thrown into a wine vat, a shocking act of vengeance and a clear message to anyone who dared to challenge her. With Empress Wang and consort Zhao eliminated, Wu Zetian solidified her position as the undisputed empress. Her path to becoming the only female emperor in Chinese history was now clear, marked by the brutal and decisive power struggle against the former empress who had initially underestimated her. Number 3. Queen Tamar of Georgia and her stepmother Burdukin. In the late 12th century, the Kingdom of Georgia was entering a golden age, but its internal politics were fraught with tension, particularly concerning the succession of a female monarch. King George III, after securing his reign, sought to ensure the smooth transition of power to his daughter Tamar. In 1178, he crowned Tamar as co-ruler during his own lifetime, an unprecedented move designed to legitimize her rule and circumvent any future challenges from male claimants. However, this act of co-rule immediately set the stage for a power struggle between the young Queen Tamar and an influential faction at court, led by her own stepmother, Queen Dowager Burdukin, and her powerful uncle, George the Rus. Burdukin, as the widowed queen of George III, naturally held significant sway at court. She was a respected figure, and along with her brother, exercised considerable influence among the nobility. While she might not have actively sought the throne for herself, her ambition lay in preserving the traditional patriarchal order and ensuring that power remained within the hands of male relatives, or at least under their strong influence. Tamar, a young woman, was seen by some as potentially weak or unable to rule effectively without male guidance. Burdukin and her faction believed that a strong male regent or a more pliant female figure would be better for the kingdom's stability. The power struggle began subtly with Burdukin and her allies, questioning Tamar's authority and judgment. They tried to limit her influence, suggesting that she defer to the wisdom of older, more experienced male counselors. They also sought to control her marriage, proposing suitors who would align with their faction and reduce Tamar's independence. Tamar, however, was not a queen to be easily manipulated. She possessed a keen intellect, strong piety, and an unyielding will to rule in her own right. The faction, led by Burdukin and her brother, reached its peak when they pushed for the appointment of George the Roos, a powerful noble, and George III's brother, as Tamar's co-ruler or principal authority as reigning queen. This move was a direct challenge to her sovereignty and her father's vision for her rule. Court became sharply divided, with nobles choosing sides between the young, legitimate queen and the established traditionalist faction. Tamar, still young but strategically astute, understood the danger. She meticulously built her own power base, cultivating loyal nobles, reforming the church, and promoting those who supported her absolute authority. She listened to her father's loyal advisors and sought to assert her own decisions slowly but surely, consolidating her grip on the levers of power. She resisted attempts to dictate her marriage, knowing that her choice of husband would be crucial to her independence. The struggle eventually came to a head in the early years of Tamar's reign after her father's death. The faction around Burdukin, feeling their influence waning, organized a conspiracy. They attempted to force Tamar to accept their preferred candidates for key ministerial positions and to remove those loyal to her. This was a direct attempt to seize control of the government from the queen. Tamar met this challenge with firm resolve. Instead of giving in, she skillfully outmaneuvered her opponents. She rallied her loyal supporters, appealed to the greater good of the kingdom, and demonstrated her unwavering commitment to her father's legacy and her own right to rule. She systematically removed the dissenting nobles from positions of power, replacing them with her own trusted allies. While Burdukin herself was not directly exiled or imprisoned, her influence and that of her faction were decisively broken. The old guard was sidelined, and the new queen's authority was asserted. Through this struggle, Tamar solidified her position as the undisputed ruler of Georgia. She went on to reign for nearly 3 decades, overseeing Georgia's Golden Age, a period of remarkable military expansion, cultural flourishing, and political stability. Her victory over the challenges posed by her stepmother and the traditionalist faction paved the way for her to become one of Georgia's most revered monarchs, a testament to her strength in establishing her singular rule against those who sought to control or diminish her power. Number 2. Boudica and Cotamandua. In the tumultuous lands of Roman Britain during the 1st century, CE, 2 powerful Celtic queens, both formidable leaders, found themselves on opposing sides of an epic power struggle that would determine the fate of native Britons against the encroaching Roman Empire. One was Boudica, queen of the Iceni, famed for her ferocity, her defiance, and her leadership of a massive rebellion. The other was Cotamandua, queen of the Brigantes, known for her pragmatism, her strategic alliances with Rome, and her shrewd political maneuvering. Their conflict was not a direct dynastic struggle for a single throne, but rather a clash of ideologies and power bases that profoundly shaped the resistance and subjugation of Britannia. Boudica's people, the Iceni, initially allied with Rome, but after the death of her husband, King Persutigus, Roman officials brutally seized Iceni lands, publicly flogged Boudica, and raped her daughters. This act of shocking brutality ignited Boudica's fury and sparked one of history's most famous revolts. Boudica, a tall, imposing figure with fiery red hair and a piercing gaze, rallied not only the Iceni but also other disgruntled tribes like the Trinovantes under her banner. Her goal was the complete expulsion of the Romans from Britain. She launched a devastating campaign, burning down Roman cities such as Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium, slaughtering Roman citizens and their allies. Her Her leadership was born of outrage and a fierce desire for vengeance and freedom. Meanwhile, in the north, Cartimandua, queen of the powerful Brigantes, had chosen a different path. She was acclaimed Queen of Rome, maintaining her rule through an alliance with the imperial power. Her strategy was one of cooperation and diplomacy, believing that resisting Rome was futile and that the best way to preserve her kingdom and her power was to work within the Roman system. This meant providing Rome with intelligence, sometimes even capturing and handing over Roman enemies. She was a shrewd politician, maintaining a precarious balance between her own tribal authority and her powerful Roman overlords. The power struggle between Boudica and Cartimandua was thus a struggle between two competing visions for British survival. Boudica represented the fierce, unyielding spirit of independence and violent resistance. Cartimandua embodied the pragmatic approach of accommodation and alliance, seeking to protect her people and secure her reign through diplomacy. Their differing strategies directly impacted the wider conflict with Rome. While Boudica was ravaging Roman settlements, Cartimandua was maintaining her allegiance, effectively denying Boudica a powerful ally in the north, and potentially providing intelligence to the Romans. Crucial moment in their indirect struggle came even before Boudica's rebellion. Cartimandua's estranged husband, Venutius, rebelled against her in Rome. Cartimandua, facing internal revolt, appealed to Rome for assistance. Roman forces intervened, saving her kingdom and reinforcing her position. This event solidified Cartimandua's reliance on Rome and further entrenched her opposition to any anti-Roman sentiment, including the kind of rebellion Boudica would soon lead. While there is no record of Boudica and Cartimandua ever meeting on the battlefield, their actions were undeniably in opposition. Boudica's destructive path threatened Cartimandua's carefully constructed stability. Had Cartimandua joined Boudica, the rebellion's chances of success might have been significantly greater. Her steadfast loyalty to Rome, despite her own internal strife, was a strategic advantage for the Roman governor Suetonius Paulinus as he rallied his forces against Boudica's rebellion. Despite its initial devastating successes, was ultimately crushed by the disciplined Roman legions. The Battle of Watling Street saw the vast but less disciplined British forces annihilated. Boudica herself likely died shortly after, either from illness or by suicide. Cartimandua, in contrast, continued to rule her Brigantian kingdom under Roman protection, albeit with ongoing internal struggles against Venutius. The outcome of their respective strategies was stark. Boudica's heroic but ultimately doomed rebellion led to immense loss of life and a brutal Roman crackdown, though her legacy became a symbol of British defiance. Cartimandua, by contrast, preserved her kingdom for a time through cooperation, though her later life was also marked by challenges and eventual reliance on Roman military intervention. Their two very different approaches to Roman conquest created an epic, albeit indirect, power struggle that shaped the very identity and future of early Britannia. Number 1. Queen Christina of Sweden and her mother Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg. The mid-17th century in Sweden was a period of great power and intellectual ferment, largely thanks to the reign of Queen Christina. But her path to absolute rule was paved with a subtle yet intense power struggle against her own mother, Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg. After the glorious death of King Gustavus Adolphus, the Lion of the North, in battle in 1632, his 6-year-old daughter, Christina, inherited the throne. Maria Eleonora, the Queen Mother, was devastated by her husband's death and plunged into deep mourning, a state that would profoundly affect her relationship with her daughter and her role in the kingdom. Maria Eleonora was a woman of strong emotions and a stubborn will. She clung to her husband's heart in a golden casket, demanded that Christina be kept in mourning clothes, and often refused to let Christina out of her sight. This emotional control soon morphed into a political struggle. As the young queen, Christina was placed under the guardianship of a regency council led by the brilliant chancellor, Axel Oxenstierna. Maria Eleonora, however, believed she should have a more dominant role in her daughter's upbringing and in the governance of the kingdom. She saw herself as the rightful guardian and an active participant in the regency. Despite the council's legal authority, the power struggle manifested in Christina's upbringing. Maria Eleonora was fiercely possessive of her daughter, often isolating her and making her childhood a lonely one. Christina, on the other hand, was an exceptionally intelligent and independent child, resentful of her mother's suffocating affection and erratic behavior. She gravitated towards the male regents and tutors, particularly Oxenstierna, who nurtured her intellect and educated her in the ways of. This preference for the council's influence over her mother's was an early sign of Christina's burgeoning independence and a direct challenge to Maria Eleonora's perceived authority. As Christina grew older, her desire to take full control of her kingdom became increasingly apparent. She was keen to assert her own will, often clashing with the Regency Council, but also subtly challenging her mother's continued attempts to exert influence. Maria Eleonora, still deep in mourning and often acting erratically, made it difficult for the council to cooperate with her, and she increasingly became a hindrance rather than a help to the young queen's development. She squandered money and often interfered in state affairs without authorization. The formal struggle came when Christina declared herself of age to rule in 1644, despite the council's wishes for her to wait. This was a decisive step in asserting her absolute authority. One of her first major acts as queen was to remove her mother from Stockholm and send her to a more distant residence. This was a strategic move to break Maria Eleonora's immediate influence over the court and Christina's daily life. Maria Eleonora resisted vehemently, but Christina's will was firm. This separation was a clear signal that Christina would not tolerate her mother's interference in her rule. Maria Eleonora, however, was not one to give up easily. She fled Sweden in 1640 and lived in various courts across Europe, including Denmark, where she attempted to garner support against her daughter's rule, or at least pressure Christina into allowing her to return with greater influence. She continuously wrote letters lamenting her fate and appealing to other European monarchs for sympathy. Her actions, though often emotionally driven, were perceived as attempts to destabilize Christina's reign or to regain her lost position of influence. Christina, now fully in control, deftly managed these challenges. She understood her mother's emotional vulnerabilities and used them to her advantage, skillfully navigating the political landscape to ensure Maria Eleonora's appeals gained no traction. Eventually, in 1643, Maria Eleonora was allowed to return to Sweden, but her movements were restricted, and her political influence was completely neutralized. She was no longer a threat to Christina's absolute authority. The power struggle between Christina and Maria Eleonora was a complex one, a battle between a possessive, grieving mother and a brilliant, determined daughter who yearned for independence and absolute power. Christina's triumph in the struggle allowed her to fully dedicate herself to the cultural and political life of Sweden, embarking on a reign that would be both remarkable and controversial, but undeniably her own, free from the shadow of her mother's overwhelming presence.